I know Africa. I've been studying Africa for about 30 years, and I've been studying Ethiopia about almost 12 years. So I know both the country and the continent well. And I know that Ethiopia was not under the threats that the media and the U.S. State Department and the countries of Europe were putting out what I would call psychological warfare, otherwise known as PSYOPs in the intelligence business. And they were basically trying to create fear and disorganization in the minds of the Ethiopian people and in the rest of the world. And when I got on the plane to come here, my government was already saying, don't go to Addis. Now, they know that's not true, just like anybody in Addis knows it. The restaurants are open, the bars are open, hotels are functioning, children are on the street. The our plane was near capacity full. The airport is functioning. So none of what the media and the State Department and the French State Department are saying is true. And the ambassador here in Washington, the Washington ambassador here in Addis, she knows it's not true because she sees the same thing I see. But she's being told to say, oh, we have a serious crisis, we have to evacuate, we're not going to, and then of course the State Department comes out and says, we're not going to have another Afghanistan. It's an absurd relation to compare Ethiopia to Afghanistan. This is all part of psychological warfare to weaken the morale, weaken the resolve of the Ethiopian government to fight for its national sovereignty. None of it's true. They know it's not true. And they're issuing these media falsehoods and disinformation. See, it's not misinformation, it's disinformation. It's intentionally designed to lead the population in thinking in a way that is contrary to reality. Well, I say this all the time. I write articles on my website, LawrenceFreemanAfricaInTheWorld.com. I do numerous interviews. And the problem is the policy coming from the United States and the State Department in particular is the wrong policy. They're actually undermining Ethiopia in the current policy. For example, by suggesting the removal of Ethiopia from AGOA is directly harming the citizens of Ethiopia. The tacit support for the TPLF is harming the people of Ethiopia, and it's harming Africa because Ethiopia is a long-time nation state, has a rich history. The modern history goes back to the Battle of Adwa in 1896. And by allowing separatist groups to launch attacks on the federal government, this is undermining the sovereignty of Ethiopia, but it's also undermining the sovereignty of all African nations, because all the African nations have ethnic divisions. I mean, I spent 20 years in Nigeria. I know the ethnic divisions. By supporting this ethnic separatist movement, the TPLF, which has declared war on an elected government, they are opening up the door for other separatist groups all over Africa, and there's hundreds of them, to launch attacks on their government. This is an attack on the Ethiopian sovereign nation state, and implicitly it's an attack on all African nation states. And it has to end. The policy that we should have, which I advocate, is a policy of development. How do we assist African nations to increase their ability to grow their economies, to improve the standard of living of the citizens? That's what we should be doing. And we're doing the opposite. We're undermining it. And it's my hope that my president, Joe Biden, will not go along with some people in his administration and his cabinet and be involved in dismembering or attempting to dismember Ethiopia the way his predecessor, Democrat President Obama, did to Libya. I'm hoping we can prevent President Biden from doing that. I work very hard on that in the United States and when I come to Africa. Well, this is a challenging question because it's not just one reason. On the simplest level, you have a group of people in the Biden administration who have long-time ties to the TPLF. And they've worked with the TPLF and they support the TPLF. And they're all over the Biden administration. And they were the same group of people who were in the Obama administration who advocated the overthrow and assassination of President Gaddafi. But there's actually a much bigger strategic question involved, which is geopolitics. And geopolitics, in my interpretation of it, it's a mental disease, because what it says is that a group of elite political, economic financiers, an oligarchy, attempts to control world politics. And in geopolitics, it's a zero-sum game. It's fixed chessboard. You either win or you lose. And the United States, it's not the United States government per se, it's a faction in the United States government that sees Ethiopia, under the current administration of the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, moving in a direction that they don't control. And these people are so crazy and insane that they would rather see the Horn of Africa go into war and chaos than support an independent nation state operating out of their control. Now, right now, the United States government in particular has lost any influence in the Horn of Africa. Sudan, they've lost. And I know Sudan very well. And now they've lost Ethiopia. So what is the United States going to do? What's their policy going to be? They have to change their policy. They can no longer go along with this geopolitical thinking, which I said is a disease. And they have to go to a policy of development. My nation, which I love, and I've studied my own history of my own nation, we were created to promote economic development. And we've had great presidents who have done that. We have to go back to the principles of the United States and our commitment to development of the rest of the world, and assist Africa in empowering it to deal with the question of economic growth. We need massive infrastructure in Africa. Ethiopia is committed to eradicating poverty. Why don't we help them do that instead of this game of destabilizing Ethiopia and the Horn of Africa, and implicitly the whole African continent, really? That's a good point. I mean, I was not surprised at the discussion that took place, the Zoom discussion with the head of the TPLF by so-called retired diplomats. But it was shocking, nevertheless, to see what they said. Now, you have to think about, again, most people don't understand the United States. The United States has a president, a Congress, has a cabinet. But it also still deals with former government officials, former ambassadors, former members of the State Department, operate as part of what we call the U.S. presidency. So when you had former diplomats, and you actually had a former American official, Daniel Yamamoto, was acting Secretary of Defense for, I believe, the Trump administration and early Obama administration. He's not just a former diplomat, he's a former American official. Their involvement in discussions with a group that's trying to overthrow the elected government of Ethiopia. Ethiopia had two elections, one in June and one in September. Over 43 million people voted for the current administration and the Prosperity Party. That's democracy. Some people didn't like the vote. We see the problems when people don't like the vote in the United States. That's democracy. Yet the United States government has yet to acknowledge that these democratic elections took place. That should be a sign of the fact the United States is not really supporting democracy. So now you have a group of former diplomats who are operating as part of an expanded presidency. That is, they're out of their official positions, but they're still involved with the government. And they're meeting with a group that's trying to overthrow a duly elected government. This should have been condemned by every elected official in the United States, by the U.S. Congress, and every elected official in Europe, because you had European officials on. And the fact that no one has the courage to condemn this and the guts to do this shows you the problem we're up against in terms of the heavy conflict of interest that's going on. Again, I don't know that President Biden is really aware of everything going on. I know I followed politics for half a century in the United States. I've been around a long time. And a lot of times presidents have no idea what's going on. He's got his hands full trying to keep the Democratic Party under control. He may get a 1 to 2 minute briefing on Ethiopia every month and then given a briefing paper to sign. So we don't know what he knows. We know there are bad apples, real bad apples in the administration. But on the other hand, I don't believe it's entirely under their control. Our job is to expose the misinformation, to expose this destabilization, to make very clear the end game could be a regime change, and that this would destabilize the entire continent of Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, 1.3 billion people. The more we get that message out, the better we can weaken the effort to carry it out. Well, I don't think they were endorsed by the United States government. They held a press conference at the press club in the U.S., but I don't think they were necessarily endorsed by the government. But they weren't. No one wanted to speak about it in the U.S. government because, again, you can have all kinds of individuals step forward and say we represent this or we represent that. But we have had 2 elections in this year in 2021. I was at the one in June. And therefore, the United States government, being a government, being a democracy, should recognize other elected governments and other countries trying to be democratic, and should not be supporting a coalition of individuals. And I don't really know what they represent. No one's really sure what they represented. But it's a scandal that we haven't recognized the election. It's also very disconcerting to me as an American that my President Joe Biden has not yet talked to Prime Minister Abiy, who were both elected. One's elected as a prime minister, Biden was elected as president. And President Biden has not talked to him. That's a scandal. It's the other scandals we haven't come out and supported the GERD, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which is a dam for development. So the United States is really completely on the wrong course right now. And I've been writing articles virtually every week or every 2 weeks. It's not too late to reverse direction. And we have to do it now before it becomes too late. The diaspora of the United States is very large. I've heard could be between 1 to 3 million Ethiopians in the United States, which would make them the second largest diaspora next to Nigeria from Africa. And they have spoken out. There have been massive demonstrations in Washington. What I would like to see, and I've discussed this with them, I've addressed their organizations, some of them, is first of all, the diaspora should be united. I know they have differences, and I don't get involved in that. But on this case, they should form a united front. They all should get together and say, we have one task right now: prevent the destabilization, overthrow, and regime change of our duly elected government, of the Prime Minister. Other issues we'll debate later. Right now, we have an immediate task at hand. And the diaspora can do another thing. The government, the Prime Minister, and the various diplomats, they are somewhat limited in what they can say because they have to carry on diplomatic dialogues with the government. I don't have to, and the diaspora doesn't have to. The diaspora can come out and say very aggressively what the United States government is doing wrong, because most of the people are they're Ethiopian Americans. They vote in U.S. elections, but they were born in Ethiopia. They have nothing that can stop them. And I would encourage the diaspora to unite and to come out and expose the current U.S. government for what they're doing, which is their end game is regime change, and reverse that course and embark on a policy of development. And if you have 1 million plus Ethiopians saying that in the United States, that's a significant force. And don't forget, the U.S. elections the congressional elections are less than 1 year away. And therefore, the Democrats are going to be very concerned about making sure they get the most votes they can, because they may lose to the Republicans in 2022. And therefore, that's another factor I think that the diaspora can be very active in. It's a very interesting history. Of course, you know it better than I do, but the Ethiopians were the only ones to defeat the colonial powers on the battlefield, March 1st, 1896, Adwa. And therefore, they were the only sub-Saharan African country never colonized. And the Europeans, if you read the headlines at the time of 1896, the Europeans went nuts that a, quote, African country, black Africans, could defeat Europeans. Then this became a symbol for the whole world. This was also a symbol in the 1935 invasion of Mussolini, where blacks and African Americans and Africans all over the world were trying to come to Ethiopia to fight in 1935 with the Ethiopians. And the embassies in Europe and the United States actually did not give them visas. But it was a symbol of pride for blacks and Africans and African Americans to unite against this fascist invasion in 35. And then, of course, you have the formation of the OAU in 1963, led by Haile Selassie, the leader emperor of Ethiopia, and Kwame Nkrumah, the father of the liberation movements. And they set up the headquarters in Addis Ababa. So in many ways, Ethiopia is seen by the other African nations as a symbol of their common history, their liberation, and their fights against colonialism. I have friends all over Africa. I was just had dinner with one of them this past week from Cote d'Ivoire. And he said to me, he can't sleep at night because he's so upset about what's going on in Ethiopia. So this is a common fight, and none of the sub-Saharan African countries have joined the U.S. You saw that the Secretary of State Blinken's visit to Kenya did not go the way he had planned. And I don't think anybody in sub-Saharan Africa is going to join this effort. I think this is an international fight, and it's a continental fight. And Ethiopia stands very much in the forefront. A, against colonialism, historically, and B, the previous 10 years, Ethiopia was the leading country in East Africa for economic growth. This conflict with Tigray is pulling down Ethiopia's path. We were on a pathway, because I was involved in it, of building new railroads, the GERD, reducing poverty. In fact, Ethiopia's slogan is to eliminate poverty. And the progress was being made. The last year, this progress has been undermined by this TPLF act, which could have been one of the reasons it was launched, was to take Ethiopia off its course of economic growth and development. Ethnicity, setting up states on ethnic grounds, is a danger to Ethiopia. It's a danger to every African country. We have to look towards a higher conception, Ethiopian citizen, not Ethiopian coming from a particular ethnic group. A citizen of Ethiopia who fights for the development of his whole country. And every ethnic group has a common interest in working with each other for the development of one united Ethiopia with one Ethiopia identity.